Why it's so hard to fall back asleep at 3 a.m.? That's the question almost everyone asks, especially when you wake up in the middle of the night with a racing mind and your body suddenly feels alert for no clear reason. You try to relax, but the sleep switch simply won't turn back on, as if the brain refuses to drop into rest mode again. Sleep science explains that this moment isn't random or just stress, and it's definitely not what most people think of as typical insomnia. What actually happens is something far more biological and measurable, a state known as the Neural Sleep Inhibition Response, where the brain temporarily blocks the deep sleep signal because it detects a shift in internal safety cues during the night. This happens when the nervous system activates a subtle brain safety response, keeping you alert even though you're exhausted and want to sleep. Studies show the brain can misinterpret harmless nighttime signals as danger. And here's the part most people never hear. This reaction is not your fault, not a weakness, not overthinking, and not a lack of discipline at bedtime. Your brain is simply responding to what it believes is necessary protection, even when nothing is actually wrong around you. Sleep experts explain that the mind can enter this hyper-alert state automatically, triggering nighttime awakenings and blocking the return to deep rest. But understanding this mechanism is only the first step, because next, I'm Dr. Sarah, a sleep medicine specialist with a background in psychiatry, and for years I've been guiding people through the patterns of nighttime awakening that strike at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., or sometimes just before dawn. These awakenings feel sudden, confusing, and deeply frustrating, especially when you're tired enough to collapse back into bed, but your mind and body refuse to return to deep rest. It's a moment most people face without understanding what the brain is doing. Across thousands of conversations, I've seen the same questions appear. Why does my brain flip awake like a light switch? Why can't I fall back asleep even when I'm exhausted? Why does my mind start racing out of nowhere? These experiences are far more common than you might imagine, and they happen in people of every age, lifestyle, and background. The brain simply shifts into a state it believes is necessary. One of the most important things I share with every person I work with is that these nighttime awakenings do not point to a flaw, a failure, or anything wrong with your mind or your willpower. Sleep science shows that the brain sometimes enters alert mode even when the environment is perfectly safe and quiet. It's a natural response wired into the nervous system, not a personal mistake. And understanding this can bring an enormous sense of relief. Many people feel ashamed or frustrated when they wake up suddenly, thinking they caused it or could have prevented it somehow. But the truth is much gentler and far more reassuring. Your brain is simply operating its built-in protection systems. This is part of human biology, not a reflection of who you are. In fact, studies show that nighttime alertness often appears automatically when the nervous system detects even tiny internal shifts. So if you find yourself awake at 3 a.m. with a restless body and racing thoughts, please hear this clearly and fully. You are not broken. Your brain is trying to protect you. This insight alone helps many people release years of pressure and confusion. When the nervous system believes vigilance is needed, it interrupts deep sleep without asking for your permission. But again, this response is reversible once you understand its mechanism. My goal is simply to guide you through what's happening inside your brain in a way that brings clarity, calm, and a sense of control back to your nights. You don't need fear or guesswork, just understanding and the right signals. And once we unfold the deeper layers of this nighttime alert cycle, you'll see why the brain stays wide awake even in absolute silence. Because before we talk about solutions, we need to look at what triggers this pattern in the first place. You go to bed exhausted, expecting your body to finally shut down and slip naturally into the deep rest your brain needs. But then, somewhere in the middle of the night, everything shifts. Your eyes open without warning, as if a silent alarm went off inside you. You look around and nothing appears unusual, yet your body feels strangely awake, alert, and tense. It's a moment that feels both familiar and impossible to control. Your body wakes up with no clear reason, no noise, no disturbance, just an internal jolt that pulls you out of your sleep cycle. Your heart feels a little more active than it should at this hour, as if it received a message you didn't consciously send. Your breathing changes subtly, your senses sharpen, and instead of drifting back into comfort, your system shifts into a quiet state of nighttime vigilance. That's when the racing thoughts begin, often without any logic, moving from one idea to another at a speed you didn't ask for. The mind becomes more alert than the moment you went to bed, creating a mental storm right when you want stillness the most. It almost feels like the brain switched on a flashlight in a dark room, searching for something that isn't there. And as the minutes pass, falling back asleep feels harder and harder. Your sleep becomes light, fragile, and easily disrupted, as if the deeper layers of rest are locked behind a door that refuses to open no matter how tired you feel. You can sense your nervous system sitting closer to the surface, not fully in danger, but not fully relaxed either. This is the stage where most people start to feel frustrated, wondering why their body is awake when they don't want it to be. Experts in sleep health explain that this nighttime pattern has nothing to do with willpower, discipline, or mental strength. You're not failing at sleeping, and you're not doing anything wrong. What's really happening is biological, not behavioral. The brain simply isn't receiving a stable deep sleep signal, so it pulls your body back into a lighter, more alert state. And once this happens, returning to deep rest becomes difficult. This is why so many people wake up at the same hour each night, feeling stuck between exhaustion and alertness without understanding why. The brain is following a pattern, not making a mistake, and that pattern is deeply connected to how the sleep cycle resets. To break the cycle, we need to understand what disrupts the signal that keeps the brain anchored in deep sleep during the night, and that leads directly into the next stage of what's really happening. Sleep science explains that during the early morning hours, your brain becomes more sensitive to internal and external signals because this is the most fragile stage of the sleep cycle. If the nervous system detects even the slightest shift in balance, a change in breathing, temperature, hormones, or tension, it interprets that signal as a potential reason to stay alert. And that single moment is enough to interrupt deep sleep instantly. When this happens, the brain enters what researchers call the Neural Sleep Inhibition Response, a built-in mechanism designed to protect you, not punish you. In this state, the sleep system becomes partially deactivated, as if the brain is keeping one foot on the brake instead of allowing the whole body to sink back into rest. It's the mind's way of ensuring safety before allowing deep sleep again. Inside this response, the brain boosts its nighttime vigilance, scanning for any sign, real or imagined, that might require attention. It lowers the depth of your sleep, keeping you closer to waking, and blocks the sleep switch from turning back on fully. This prevents the nervous system from dropping into restoration mode, even though your body desperately wants to return to sleep. As a result, you stay stuck in a shallow, restless state. Your nervous system also becomes more reactive during this phase, meaning that tiny sensations feel bigger than they normally would. A thought becomes a chain of thoughts, a shift in temperature feels more noticeable, and a slight heartbeat change seems louder than usual. This heightened sensitivity is part of the brain's safety wiring, not a sign that anything is wrong with you. This is why your racing mind feels automatic and uncontrollable. When the neural sleep inhibition response activates, the brain prioritizes awareness over relaxation, thinking it is helping you by keeping you prepared. Studies show that when melatonin drops too early and cortisol rises too soon, the brain naturally shifts toward protection instead of sleep. Understanding this mechanism brings relief for many people because it reveals that nighttime awakenings have a real cause, a predictable biological pattern inside the sleep system. And once you understand what pushes the brain into alert mode, you can begin to influence the signals that guide it back out. The next step is discovering why this pattern intensifies at certain hours and what makes the brain especially vulnerable during the night. Your body depends on two powerful circadian signals to stay asleep at night: high melatonin levels that keep the system calm and settled, and low cortisol levels that hold the brain in a state of deep rest. This hormonal balance is what stabilizes your internal sleep rhythm, guiding the brain gently through each stage of the night. When these signals are aligned, sleep feels natural, steady, and restorative. But when they slip out of sync, everything begins to shift. During the early morning hours, the circadian rhythm becomes delicate because this is when cortisol naturally begins to rise very slowly, preparing your body for the upcoming transition into daytime. Normally, melatonin stays strong enough to keep sleep stable, but if the nervous system becomes overly sensitive, that balance can tip too early and too suddenly. The brain reacts to this shift as if it needs to wake up. When the system is on high alert, even small changes feel significant, so the brain triggers a brain safety alert sooner than it should. This premature alert signal acts like a subtle internal alarm, quiet but powerful enough to disrupt the deep phases of sleep. It pulls your awareness closer to the surface, making your body feel awake despite your exhaustion, and breaking the continuity your circadian rhythm is trying to maintain. Once this mini alarm sounds, the entire sleep cycle is affected. Your deep sleep gets interrupted abruptly, the deep sleep signal weakens, and the brain shifts into a lighter, more reactive mode. This makes you far more responsive to thoughts, sensations, or worries, even if they are minor or meaningless in the moment. The brain believes it is preparing you, not disturbing you. That's why repetitive thoughts begin looping automatically, as if the mind is scanning for danger that doesn't exist. The nervous system increases its internal monitoring, and suddenly the path back to sleep feels blocked. You aren't choosing to stay awake, your biology is holding you there. Experts emphasize that this response is not psychological at all. It's physiology working exactly as it was designed. And understanding this shift in your circadian rhythm is key because it reveals why early morning awakenings feel so intense and stubborn. Your brain isn't malfunctioning, it's responding to signals it misread. But the same rhythm that pulls you awake can be guided back into balance when your system begins receiving the right nighttime cues again. To see how this internal sleep security system truly operates, we need to look deeper into how the brain interprets safety at night. Imagine your brain as a nighttime security system, constantly scanning the environment to decide whether you can stay asleep throughout the night. This system doesn't rely on conscious thought or logic. It operates silently and automatically in the background. Its only job is to determine whether you're safe enough to remain in deep, restorative sleep throughout the night. And this internal system reacts to signals you often can't even feel. When your brain senses safety, everything works beautifully. Melatonin flows naturally through your system, your muscles soften, your breathing steadies, and the deep sleep signal stays strong and uninterrupted. The nervous system drops into its lowest alert state, allowing your body to restore, repair, and recharge. This is what healthy nighttime security looks like inside the brain. But the moment the brain detects potential risk, even if the danger isn't real or is barely noticeable, the entire system shifts to protect you. It activates the Neural Sleep Inhibition Response, a mode where your sleep becomes lighter, shallower, and more fragile. The brain opens its internal eyes, so to speak, keeping you closer to wakefulness just in case you need to react. This is why a perfectly quiet room can still feel tense at 3 a.m., and why your body might wake up before your mind understands why. The brain isn't trying to disturb you, it's making sure you're safe before allowing you to sink back down. This protective mode interrupts the deep sleep cycle, weakens the continuity of rest, and makes falling back to sleep feel far harder than it should. And the most important part to remember is this: your brain is not failing you, it's guarding you. This response is built into human biology, wired into the nervous system to keep you alive, not uncomfortable. If your brain senses the faintest hint of imbalance, it chooses vigilance instead of deep sleep, believing that awareness is the safer option. Understanding this invisible nighttime alarm helps you see why your awakenings happen so suddenly and why they feel so difficult to recover from. But once you learn how to guide your brain back into safe mode, its security system becomes calmer, quieter, and more predictable. And to understand how this shift becomes chronic for so many people, we need to look at the long-term effects of fragmented sleep. When your sleep becomes fragmented night after night, your brain begins adapting to this new pattern of vigilance. It slowly learns that waking up is normal and that staying alert is safer than relaxing fully. This creates a chronic loop where deep sleep becomes harder to enter and much easier to break. The result is a nervous system that stays half awake even when you're exhausted. Over time, this pattern shows up the moment you open your eyes. Morning fatigue becomes a default state because your body never reached the restorative stages it needed. You wake up feeling like you were sleeping on the surface, as if you rested but didn't recover. This isn't laziness or a lack of willpower, it's the biological cost of a system that couldn't fully switch off. During the day, focus becomes harder to maintain, not because your mind is undisciplined, but because it's operating with incomplete energy reserves. A brain that was half alert all night struggles to settle into deep concentration. It tries to think clearly while still managing sleep-related fatigue, leaving you mentally sluggish even when motivation is high. Many people also notice a subtle anxiety upon waking, a light internal tension that appears without reason. This isn't psychological overthinking, it's the residue of a nervous system that stayed vigilant for hours. Your body wakes up already on alert, as if it never fully left nighttime guard mode. That quiet undercurrent of unease is a physiological leftover, not a flaw. At night, the cycle flips again. The brain becomes hyperactive when it should be winding down, a phenomenon known as hyperactive brain at night. Thoughts repeat, sensations feel louder, and falling asleep becomes harder than it should be. This isn't due to thinking too much or being undisciplined. It's the same vigilance loop continuing after sunset. None of this is a productivity problem, and none of it is proof that you're doing something wrong. It's simply the nervous system remaining in a persistent state of alert. But the good news is that this state is reversible once you understand how to retrain the brain's internal safety system. And the first step is uncovering what keeps this cycle alive, which leads directly into the next topic. The encouraging truth is this: your brain is not stuck in this pattern forever. Sleep experts emphasize that the brain is plastic, meaning it can relearn, reshape, and reset its nighttime responses. Even if you've been waking at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. for months or years, the system that misfires can be guided back into balance. Your sleep circuitry is more adaptable than it feels. This reset begins when you send the brain 3 specific signals, each one communicating safety in a different way. These aren't tricks or hacks, they are biological messages your nervous system understands. When the right combination reaches the sleep centers, the hyper-alert loop begins to soften and the neural pathways for deep sleep become active again. The first is the circadian signal, the internal timing cue that tells your brain when to produce melatonin and when to quiet cortisol. When this rhythm becomes stable again, your sleep window deepens naturally. Your brain stops waking just in case, and night awakenings become less abrupt and less frequent. The second is the nervous system calm signal, a message that tells your body it can downshift safely. This isn't about relaxing by force, but lowering internal activation so deeply that the brain stops scanning for danger in the dark. When this happens, the racing mind loses fuel. Your physiology begins to allow rest again. The third is the internal safety signal, the one most people never realize they're missing. This is the message that convinces the brain it no longer needs to guard you through the night. It's subtle, but once activated, the brain releases its grip on hypervigilance and the sleep switch becomes available again. When these three signals align, circadian, calm, and safety, the deep sleep signal is restored without effort. You don't have to force yourself to sleep or battle with your thoughts at 3 a.m. You simply guide your brain back to a state where sleep becomes the default again. There are natural ways to help the brain reduce nighttime alertness without pressure, without forcing sleep, and without relying on anything that disrupts your internal rhythm. These approaches focus on restoring communication between your nervous system and your circadian clock. When the brain receives calmer, clearer signals, the overnight awakenings begin to lose intensity. And for those who need extra support, especially when the mind wakes up suddenly at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m., there is a complementary, safe, and natural resource that many sleep specialists consider helpful. It's doctor-approved, designed specifically for nighttime use, and created for people whose brains stay alert in the dark. You'll find it linked in the first pinned comment. This is not a sedative and not a quick fix solution, and it doesn't try to knock you out chemically. Instead, it works by sending the brain the same biological cues it naturally expects at night. It supports melatonin stability, lowers internal activation, and allows cortisol to remain quiet until morning. In other words, it works with your physiology, not against it. What makes this approach effective is that it doesn't try to override your sleep system. It gives your brain the conditions it needs to exit the neural sleep inhibition response gracefully. When that protective state fades, the deep sleep signal becomes accessible again, and the sleep switch can turn back on without effort. For many people, this is the first time they feel their nighttime awakenings beginning to soften. The alertness becomes less sharp, the mind stops accelerating the moment they open their eyes, and the body no longer feels stuck between tired and wired. These shifts signal that the nervous system is returning to a safer, calmer nighttime baseline. And once the brain starts receiving the right cues consistently, the entire sleep pattern begins to reorganize itself. Deep sleep becomes steadier, nighttime awakenings lose their intensity, and the sense of being on guard finally eases. This is the foundation for what comes next, because the final piece is understanding how to apply it. So if you wake up at 3 a.m. feeling like your brain simply refuses to switch off again, please know this is not weakness and not a personal flaw. Your system is doing what it was designed to do, protect you when it senses even the smallest imbalance. And the good news is that this protective mechanism can be guided back into a calmer, healthier rhythm. You don't need to fight your mind in the dark or force yourself to think less when you're exhausted. What you need is to help the brain feel safe enough to release its nighttime vigilance. That's why the natural support in the pinned comment was created specifically for these early morning awakenings as a gentle ally for your sleep physiology. It works as a simple, complementary signal that helps the nervous system settle, supports circadian balance, and encourages the deep sleep signal to stabilize throughout the night. If your awakenings have been happening for a while, this extra cue can make a meaningful difference. And for those who wonder why the brain seems so alert at exactly 2 a.m. or 3 a.m., the next step is understanding the early cortisol shift. Most people don't realize that cortisol can rise hours before the sun comes up, and when that happens too soon, it directly fuels the nighttime alertness cycle. That's why the video pinned at the end of this one is essential for anyone trying to restore deeper, steadier sleep. In that next video, I'll explain why cortisol wakes up early, how it interacts with your sleep architecture, and why this shift can make the mind feel wired even when the body is begging for rest. Watch that video next, because once you understand how cortisol shapes your nights, you'll finally see the missing piece behind your early morning awakenings. And when these insights come together, your brain can start rebuilding the deep, stable sleep you've been needing for so long.